Number 1. The Varna Necropolis. In the autumn of 1972, a machine operator named Rachel Marinov was cutting a trench for electrical cabling on the western shore of Lake Varna, in Bulgaria. He noticed small, bright objects in the spoil. They were gold. What he had stumbled into was a cemetery that would rewrite the timeline of human wealth and human power. The graves date to between 4,600 and 4,200 BC. That makes this gold older than the pyramids of Egypt, older than the first cities of Mesopotamia, older than writing itself. Across the whole site, archaeologists uncovered around 300 graves. Inside them lay more than 3,000 objects of gold, weighing about 6 kilograms in total. It is the oldest large cache of worked gold ever found anywhere on Earth. But one grave stands apart from all the others. Excavated in 1974, it is known simply as Grave 43. Inside lay a man perhaps 40 to 45 years old, around 1.8 meters tall, laid out flat on his back. He was not buried with a few ornaments. He was buried with around 990 gold objects weighing roughly 1.5 kilograms. That is more gold than has been found in the entire rest of the contemporary prehistoric world combined. He wore gold arm rings and strings of gold beads. He carried a scepter and a copper axe with a gold-banded handle. Gold appliques had been sewn onto his clothing. And among the items was a sheet of gold shaped as a penis sheath, one of the earliest objects of its kind, a marker of elite male status. Here's the puzzle that no one has fully solved. This man held the wealth of a king. But there were no kings. There were no cities here, no writing, no palaces, no large-scale agriculture. By every model archaeologists once trusted, a society this early should not have produced this kind of inequality. And yet the evidence is undeniable. Some graves overflow with gold, others, lying right beside them, hold almost nothing at all. This is the earliest unmistakable social hierarchy in the human record. The Varna people were not isolated. Their graves contain Mediterranean spondylus and dentalium shells, proof of trade routes reaching all the way to the Aegean. Some of their graves held no body at all. These are called cenotaphs, symbolic burials, and several contained clay face masks with gold marking the eyes, the mouth, and a golden diadem. Researcher Vladimir Slavchov of the Varna Museum has spent years reassessing the chronology of this haunting place. The Varna gold predates the famous gold of Troy by around 2,000 years. Then, around 4,200 to 4,000 BC, the whole culture collapsed. The cause may have been climate change, a rising Black Sea, or pressure from the steppe. The gold-working tradition simply vanished. So who was the man in Grave 43, and where did the idea of a god-king come from this early? We do not know. And the next tomb is just as strange, because its dead were buried not with gold, but with eagles. Number 2. The Tomb of the Eagles. In 1958, a farmer named Ronald Simison was working his land at Isbister on the island of South Ronaldsay in Orkney, Scotland. He uncovered a low stone cairn. What he found inside has unsettled archaeologists ever since. This Neolithic chambered tomb dates to around 3,200 BC, and it stayed in use for 800 to 1,000 years. The archaeologist John Hedges studied it and gave it its famous name in his 1984 book, The Tomb of the Eagles. Inside were the disarticulated remains of an estimated 340 people, represented by around 16,000 human bones. But the bones were not alone. Mixed among them were the bones and talons of at least 8 to 14 white-tailed sea eagles, the largest eagle in Europe. For decades, the popular explanation was simple and appealing. The eagle was a totem, a sacred clan symbol, and the people had buried their dead alongside their emblem. The bodies had not been placed in the tomb whole. They appear to have been excarnated first, the flesh removed by exposure to the open air before selected bones were carried inside. The skulls tell a hard story. They show healed fractures, arthritis, and heavy dental wear. Many of these people were dead before the age of 30. The cairn itself is a stalled structure with side chambers and an entrance so low you must crawl to get in, mirroring the Orcadian idea that a house of the dead should look like a house of the living. Then came the twist. When the eagle bones themselves were finally radiocarbon dated, in studies published around 2017, the result was startling. The eagles seem to have been deposited around 2,450 to 2,000 BC. That is potentially 1,000 years after many of the human bones were placed inside. The tidy totem story fell apart. If the birds arrived 1,000 years later, what were they really doing there? Were they always sacred, Or did their meaning change across 40 generations of use? The tomb sits on a dramatic sea cliff, beside the very grounds where the sea eagles once nested, so an ecological link is real. Simison also found a Bronze Age burnt mound nearby, and the site is still privately run by his family, which is unusual for a monument of this importance. But the central question remains unanswered. Why would a community curate thousands of human bones, sorted and stored over a millennium, and mingle them with the bones of raptors? The next tomb is obsessed with something else entirely, not bones, carvings. Number 3. Gavrinis. On a small island in the Gulf of Morbihan, in Brittany, France, stands a passage tomb that contains the densest concentration of carved megalithic art in all of Europe. Its name, Gavrinis, means roughly Goat Island. It was built between about 4,200 and 3,500 BC by the same culture that raised the Great Stone Rose of Karnak. It was first explored in 1832, and later studied intensively by Zachary Le Rouzic and the archaeologist Charles Tanguy Le Roux. The cairn is about 50 meters across. A passage roughly 14 meters long leads to the chamber. And here is what makes it extraordinary. 23 of its 29 upright stones are completely covered in carving. Not a few marks. Entire surfaces, floor to ceiling, dense with concentric arcs, zigzags, serpents, axe shapes, shield forms, and nested patterns that look uncannily like giant fingerprints. No writing explains them. They are pure symbol, and we cannot read them. But the deepest mystery at Gavrinis is not the carving. It is the capstone over the chamber. That capstone is a broken fragment of a much larger, engraved standing stone, a stela. And the other fragments of that same broken stone were found, identified, and match as capstones in two completely different tombs, kilometers away, at the Table des Marchands, in a tomb at Ervengles. The builders deliberately smashed a sacred monument and shared its pieces among separate tombs. The original stela may once have stood beside the Grand Menhir Brisset, a colossal standing stone weighing perhaps 330 tons, now fallen and broken into pieces. Why would a society destroy one of its own great monuments and recycle the fragments? It implies a dramatic ideological rupture, a rejection or repurposing of an older way of believing. The axe and crook carvings are read as symbols of authority or of a deity, but their precise meaning is unknown. Leroux suggested the wavy lines might represent water, or a schematic landscape. The passage may even align with the midwinter sunrise, just as the Irish tombs do. When Gavrinis was built, it was not yet an island. Rising seas since the Neolithic cut it off from the mainland near the great monuments of Loch Mariachwer, and its motifs echo the carvings at Newgrange and Knowth in Ireland, hinting at a shared symbolic world stretched along the Atlantic coast. The carvings were possibly painted, meant to be read by flickering torchlight. So why did this single tomb receive such obsessive decoration when its neighbors did not, and why destroy an older monument to build it? At the next site, the impossible thing is not the carving, it is the sheer weight of the stone. Number 4. The Dolmen of Menga. At Antequera, in the province of Malaga in southern Spain, stands one of the largest megalithic structures in Europe. The Dolmen of Menga was built between about 3,800 and 3,600 BC. Together with two neighboring tombs, Vera and El Romeral, it was made a UNESCO World Heritage Site in 2016. Its chamber is about 25 meters long, 6 meters wide, and 3.5 meters high, formed of 32 enormous megaliths. The largest capstone weighs an estimated 150 tons. Some estimates run as high as 200. It is among the heaviest single stones ever moved by people in European prehistory. In 2023, a study led by Leonardo Garcia San Juan and his colleagues called Menga one of the greatest feats of Neolithic engineering ever attempted. Their analysis concluded that the stones were dragged from a quarry around 1 kilometer away, using ramps, levers, and a large, precisely coordinated labor force. The builders, they argued, understood friction, the center of mass, and the mechanics of stone. Then there is the well. Sunk into the floor of the chamber is a shaft roughly 19.5 meters deep. Its purpose is fiercely debated. Was it a source of water? A ritual passage to an underworld? A symbolic descent into the earth? No one knows. To carry those vast capstones, the builders set 3 pillars inside the chamber, a rare engineering solution among the dolmens of Europe. But the strangest feature of Menga is where it points. Almost every great tomb of this age is oriented toward a moment in the sky, a sunrise or a sunset. Menga is not. Its entrance is aimed at a mountain, the Peña de los Enamorados, whose profile looks like a giant human face lying on its back, gazing at the heavens. It is one of the very few megalithic tombs in Europe oriented toward a landmark rather than a celestial event. The archaeoastronomer Michael Hoskin documented this anomaly, and inside that very mountain is a rock shelter, the Matacabras, painted with Neolithic art, tying the peak to ritual. The acidic soil destroyed almost all the human remains, so we cannot even say with confidence who is buried here. We can weigh the capstone, we can map the alignment, we cannot say what any of it meant. What was worth dragging 150 tons of rock across the landscape, and what was the deep well truly for? The next tomb hides a different kind of mystery because it was built directly on top of an older, sacred place that its makers chose to bury. Number 5. Bryn Celli Ddu. On the island of Anglesey in North Wales lies a monument whose name means the mound in the dark grove. Bryn Celli Ddu dates to the late Neolithic around 3000 BC. But it was not built on empty ground. It was raised on top of something older. It was excavated by W.J. Hemp between 1928 and 1929, and his findings still frame the debate today. Beneath the tomb and predating it, archaeologists found a stone circle, a henge, of around 14 stones surrounded by a ditch and a bank. At some point, the people stopped using the henge and built a passage tomb inside it, over it, through it. That is a dramatic reversal. That is a dramatic. A monument open to the sky was deliberately covered and turned into a chamber for the dead. Why they did this, whether the older place was decommissioned, sanctified, or violently replaced, is one of the great unanswered questions of British prehistory. Inside and around the tomb are features that defy easy explanation. There is the famous pattern stone, carved on several faces with sinuous meandering spirals and wavy lines. The original now sits in the National Museum of Wales with a replica on site. What the serpentine carvings mean, whether snakes or water or something purely abstract, no one can say. Inside the chamber stands a smooth, freestanding pillar of stone that holds up nothing at all. It is structural nonsense and ritual everything. Some think it was a symbolic axis, or stood for a person, or a god. There was more. Archaeologists found the burial of an ox, an offering placed in a pit, and a separate pit holding burnt human bone, evidence of a sequence of fire and burial that we can only partly reconstruct. The passage is aligned to the midsummer sunrise, so that on the longest day, light enters and reaches the chamber. Outside, a standing stone and a forecourt rich in white quartz suggest a staged ceremonial approach. Recent fieldwork in the 2010s found further rock art, cairns, and a whole ritual landscape surrounding the tomb. Bryn Celli Ddu is a cultural hybrid, blending Irish passage tomb ideas with native Welsh and British henge traditions. But the full logic of its rituals, the henge, then the tomb, then the buried pillar, then the sacrificed ox, has never been satisfactorily ordered. What kind of belief makes you bury a standing stone inside a tomb? The next site answers the question of why a place stays sacred, because people kept returning to it for 5,000 years. Number 6. Hougue Bie. In the parish of Grouville on the island of Jersey stands one of the best preserved passage graves in all of Western Europe. Hougue Bie was built around 3,500 BC. The earthen mound that covers it is about 12 meters high and 50 meters across, one of the tallest such mounds in the entire region. It was excavated in 1924 by the Société Jersiaise, who revealed the passage and chamber intact beneath the earth. The passage runs about 18.5 meters to a cross-shaped cruciform chamber with side cells, and like the great Irish tombs, it is aligned to the sky. At the spring and autumn equinox, around the 20th of March and the 22nd of September, the rising sun shines straight down the passage and lights the back wall of the chamber. To achieve that, the builders tracked the solar year with a precision equal to anything at Newgrange. But the most extraordinary thing about Hougue Bie is what sits on top of it. Crowning the prehistoric mound are two medieval chapels. One, the chapel of Notre Dame de la Clarté, dates to the 12th century. The other, the Jerusalem Chapel, to the 16th. Christians built their churches directly on top of a pagan tomb that was already thousands of years old. The sacred meaning of this single spot was carried, unbroken, across 5,000 years and two utterly different religions. Few places on Earth can claim such a continuity of reverence. Inside, archaeologists found limpet shells, stone tools, and fragments of human bone, though the acidic ground destroyed most of the skeletal material. The capstones of the chamber weigh more than 20 tons each, hauled and set by hand. In the Middle Ages, a legend grew around the mound, a tale of a lord and a slain dragon. And in the Second World War, German occupiers dug a command bunker straight into the same mound, adding yet another layer to its long history. The cruciform plan links Jersey across the seaways to the Boyne Valley in Ireland and to Brittany. The purpose of the side cells, whether for separate burials, for offerings, or as symbolic compartments, is still debated, and no one can explain why this particular mound was built so much taller than its neighbors. What was it about this exact patch of ground that drew people back to it again and again for 5,000 years? At the next tomb, the precision of the builders was matched only by the people who broke in to vandalize it. Number 7. Maeshowe. On the mainland of Orkney stands the finest chambered tomb in northern Europe, part of the World Heritage Site known as the Heart of Neolithic Orkney. Maeshowe was built around 2800 BC. It is a masterpiece of engineering. The central chamber is built from precisely fitted flagstone slabs, some of them weighing as much as 30 tons, with walls that curve inward in a corbelled roof. In each corner of the square chamber stands a great buttress stone, both structural and, perhaps, symbolic. The entrance passage runs about 11 meters, and it is aligned with extraordinary care. For roughly 3 weeks around the midwinter solstice, the setting sun shines directly down the passage and illuminates the rear wall of the chamber. The alignment points toward the barnhouse stone, and beyond it, the hills of Hougue, weaving the tomb into a wider sacred landscape. The whole structure sits on a leveled platform, ringed by a ditch and a bank, the product of enormous coordinated labor. Then, more than 4,000 years after it was built, history broke into Maeshowe, quite literally. In the 12th century AD, Norse crusaders forced their way inside and sheltered in the chamber, and while they waited, they carved. They left around 30 runic inscriptions on the walls, the largest single collection of runic graffiti found anywhere outside Scandinavia. They carved a dragon, a walrus, and boasts about treasure carried off from the mound. They left crude personal messages, the kind of thing people scratch on walls in every age. The Norse texts speak of treasure once held inside Maeshowe. But what the original Neolithic builders placed there, we will never know. When the antiquarian James Ferrer excavated the tomb in 1861, he found it already emptied, looted long before. So one of the most precisely engineered structures of the ancient world yielded almost nothing of its original contents. The buttress stones may even be reused standing stones from an earlier monument, hinting that this sacred spot was old before Maeshowe was raised. The solstice alignment ties Maeshowe to a tradition that spanned the whole continent, a fixation on the turning point of the year. Today, webcams broadcast the midwinter light entering the chamber each December, but the central puzzle holds. Why build something so vast, so precise, so deliberately aligned to the dying and returning sun, only for it to be emptied and forgotten? What was inside before the Vikings came? The next tomb holds the answer to a different question because its walls may carry the oldest map of the moon. Number 8, Knowth. In the Boyne Valley of County Meath, in Ireland, 3 great tombs dominate the landscape. The most famous is Newgrange. But its neighbor Knowth may be the strangest of all. The Great Mound at Knowth was built around 3200 BC. It is about 95 meters across and 12 meters high, and it is ringed by at least 18 smaller satellite tombs. It was excavated over decades, beginning in 1962 under the archaeologist George Yogan. Knowth breaks the pattern of its neighbors in a fundamental way. It has not one passage, but 2, entering from opposite sides of the mound. The eastern passage runs about 40 meters to a cross-shaped chamber. The western passage runs about 34 meters. No other tomb in the Boyne Valley is built this way. And then there is the art. Knowth holds the largest concentration of megalithic art in all of Western Europe, somewhere between a quarter and a third of every known example on the continent. More than 200 decorated stones survive, carved with spirals, lozenges, crescents, radial bursts, and serpentine lines. One stone has become the center of a remarkable claim. The researcher Philip Stuke argued that its carved arcs match the dark patches, the Maria, of the moon, making it perhaps the oldest known map of the moon ever created by human hands. Some researchers go further and suggest that the passages and the art at Knowth track lunar cycles, not just the sun, making the entire mound a kind of lunar observatory. The eastern passage may align with the equinox sunrise, the western with the equinox sunset, though the alignments are debated and later builders altered the entrances. Inside the eastern chamber sits a great decorated stone basin, possibly made to hold cremated remains, and the passages yielded the cremated bones of more than 200 people. But the meaning of the carvings remains contested. Are they astronomical maps? Are they shamanic, the entoptic vision seen in trance, as researchers like Jeremy Dronfield have proposed? Or are they symbols we will simply never decode? The lunar map idea is fascinating, but critics warn that the arcs may be generic motifs that our pattern-hungry modern eyes are overreading. Knowth was never truly abandoned. It was reused across the millennia by Bronze Age people, by Iron Age communities, by early Christians who dug souterrains and made it the seat of the kings of northern Brabant, and by the Normans. The two opposed passages may encode a deliberate duality, sunrise and sunset, life and death, built into the very architecture. But why does Knowth have twice the passages and far more art than Newgrange, standing just across the valley? No one can say. The next tomb poses the opposite question because after 1,000 years of use, its builders chose to seal it shut forever. Number 9. West Kennet, Long Barrow. In Wiltshire, in southern England, near the giant stone circle of Avebury and the mysterious mound of Silbury Hill, lies one of the largest and best preserved chambered tombs in Britain. West Kennet Long Barrow was built around 3650 BC. It is about 100 meters long, one of the longest barrows in the entire country. At its eastern end are 5 stone chambers, built from massive sarsen blocks in oolitic limestone. It was excavated first in 1859 by John Thurnham, and again in 1955 and 56 by Stuart Piggott and Richard Atkinson. The chambers held the remains of at least 46 people, from newborn infants to the very old. But the bones were not laid out as complete bodies. They were partly disarticulated and sorted. Skulls and long bones were missing or rearranged. This was not careless decay. The people of West Kennet were removing bones from the tomb and circulating them, keeping the dead present among the living. It is the signature of an ancestor cult where the bones of the dead remained socially active for generations. For around 1,000 years, the tomb stayed in use. People entered, deposited, removed, and rearranged, and then, around 2000 BC, they ended it. Not gradually, deliberately. They packed the chambers to the roof with chalk rubble, earth, and debris. The fill contained broken pottery, including grooved ware and beaker sherds, along with beads, bone, and flint, the remains of a great closing ritual. Then they blocked the entrance with 3 enormous sarsen standing stones, one of them over 3 meters tall, sealing the tomb shut for good. This is the central mystery of West Kennet. Why end 1,000 years of careful, continuous access with a single, violent, final act of closure? The timing is the clue. The sealing coincides with sweeping social change across late Neolithic Britain, the arrival of new people and new beliefs, the beaker culture. It is as if a door to the old world was being deliberately shut. Were they honoring the ancestors or shutting them away? Protecting something or imprisoning it? The barrow is oriented roughly east to west, its chambered, active end facing the rising sun. Its long western tail is solid earth and chalk with no chambers at all, and its purpose is debated. The skeletons show disease, arthritis, and one individual carried an injury linked to an arrowhead. West Kennet predates Silbury Hill and the Avebury Circle, anchoring the very beginning of that vast ritual complex. But the final gesture of its builders, the total, emphatic, permanent seal, remains genuinely opaque. The last tomb is the most famous of them all, and it was engineered to catch the sun just once a year. Number 10. Newgrange. Also, in the Boyne Valley of County Meath stands the monument that has come to symbolize the genius of the Neolithic world. Newgrange was built around 3200 BC. That makes it roughly 500 years older than the Great Pyramid of Giza, and more than 1,000 years older than the Great Stone Circle of Stonehenge. The mound is about 85 meters across and 13 meters high, covering roughly a single acre of ground. A passage about 19 meters long leads to a cross-shaped chamber beneath a corbelled stone roof that has stayed watertight for more than 5,000 years. The tomb was lost and rediscovered in 1699 when workers removing stone for a landowner named Charles Campbell broke into the entrance. But it was the archaeologist Michael J. O'Kelly who, between 1962 and 1975, fully excavated and restored it, and who uncovered its greatest secret. On the 21st of December 1967, O'Kelly became the first person in modern times to stand in the chamber at dawn on the midwinter solstice and watch what the builders had designed. Above the entrance, the builders constructed a feature found nowhere else, a roof box. It is a deliberate gap, set apart from the doorway, positioned so that for a few days around the winter solstice, between roughly the 19th and the 23rd of December, the light of the rising sun enters through it. For about 17 minutes, a narrow beam travels down the long passage and creeps across the floor of the central chamber, lighting the darkness at the heart of the mound. Then it withdraws, and the chamber returns to black for another year. To make the beam reach the chamber floor, despite the passage rising as it goes, the builders separated the light box from the entrance. It is a piece of astronomical engineering thousands of years ahead of its time. The entrance stone, Curbstone 1, is carved with the triple spiral, the Triskel, one of the most recognized images of all European prehistory. The facade is faced with white quartz and rounded granite cobbles, though O'Kelly's reconstruction of a near-vertical quartz wall is still debated by other archaeologists. The quartz was carried from the Wicklow Mountains around 70 kilometers away, and the granite from the Mourne Mountains, proof of stone sourced across great distances. 97 curbstones ring the mound, many of them carved. Only the remains of a handful of people were found inside, suggesting Newgrange was for a chosen few, or was symbolic rather than a crowded cemetery. To achieve such astronomical precision, a pre-literate farming society must have observed the sky across generations and passed the knowledge faithfully down. In Irish mythology, Newgrange became the home of the Tuatha De Danann and the god the Dagda, a memory of sacred meaning carried across thousands of years. But how did farmers without writing achieve this, and what does the triple spiral truly mean? That question opens onto something larger, a pattern that runs through every tomb we have seen. Stand back from these 10 tombs, and a thread emerges that connects them across thousands of kilometers of coastline. It is the sky. At Newgrange, the chamber catches the midwinter sunrise. At Maeshowe, far to the north in Orkney, the chamber catches the midwinter sunset, the opposite end of the same shortest day. At Hougue Bie on Jersey and possibly at Knowth, the alignment is to the equinox, the moment of balance between light and dark. At Bryn Celli Ddu in Wales, it is the midsummer sunrise, the longest day. At Gavrinis in Brittany, the passage may catch the midwinter sun once more. Only Menga breaks the rule, aiming not at the sky, but at a mountain shaped like a sleeping face. The rest share an obsession. Scattered cultures, separated by sea and by centuries, with no shared language and no writing between them, all independently chose to lock their tombs onto the turning points of the solar year. To do that, they had to observe the sun across many lifetimes, recording where it rose and set, and then orient tens of thousands of tons of stone to within a few degrees of a target they could only confirm on a single morning each year. These were not vague gestures. They built light events lasting only minutes into permanent architecture. The roof box at Newgrange is the most sophisticated solution we know, but the impulse runs through all of them. The solstice carried a clear symbolism, the sun sinking to its lowest point and then, against the cold and the dark, beginning to return. Death and rebirth. The tombs may have served at once as calendars and as ritual theaters. places where the community gathered to watch the light reach the dead. There's genuine scientific debate here. How precise were these alignments really, and how much is coincidence read backward by modern eyes? Archaeoastronomers like Michael Hoskin have tried to measure it rigorously, but the broad pattern is hard to dismiss. From Ireland to Orkney, from Wales to Jersey to Brittany, the builders placed their dead exactly where the year's turning light would reach them. The alignments are real and measurable. The belief that drove the people to build them is lost. And that loss is mirrored in the second thread that ties these tombs together, the carvings on their walls. The same symbols appear again and again across these monuments. The triple spiral, concentric arcs, lozenges, zigzags, and long serpentine lines. They are carved at Gavrinis in Brittany, at Knowth and Newgrange in Ireland, on the pattern stone at Bryn Celli Ddu in Wales. These cultures shared a visual vocabulary stretched across more than 1,000 kilometers of Atlantic coastline, and yet not a single word of writing accompanies any of it. It is pure symbol, with no key to translate it. Researchers have offered 3 broad kinds of explanation, and they treat each other with suspicion. The first, cautious and mainstream, is that the carvings are decorative, or that they mark territory and identity. The second is astronomical, that the patterns map the sun and the moon and their cycles, the boldest example being the claim that one stone at Knowth charts the dark seas of the moon. The third is shamanic, the idea developed by researchers like Jeremy Dronfield and David Lewis Williams that these are entoptic images, the geometric patterns the human brain generates in deep trance and altered states. What makes the carvings even stranger is where some of them sit. A number are concentrated at entrances and on chamber stones, the thresholds between worlds. But others were carved on hidden faces of stones, surfaces that were built into the dark and never meant to be seen by any living eye. They were made for the dead, not the living. At Gavrinis, the builders even took carved stones and reused them, breaking and resetting sacred material. The carvings could be resacralized, given new meaning in new contexts. This is the closest thing we have to a Neolithic text, and we will never translate it. The danger is overreading, letting pattern-hungry modern minds see maps and messages where the ancient makers may have intended something else entirely. Similar shapes carved 1,000 kilometers apart need not have meant the same thing. The carvings prove sophistication beyond doubt. They prove a connected world of shared ideas, but they refuse to reveal their content. And the people who could read them carried that knowledge into the same darkness as their dead. Which brings us to the strangest behaviors of all, the things these people did to their monuments and their dead. Look closely at what these builders actually did, and you find acts that resist every easy explanation. At Gavrinis, they took a giant carved standing stone, smashed it, and shared its fragments as capstones across 3 separate tombs. At West Kennet, after 1,000 years of use, they packed the chambers solid with rubble and sealed the entrance behind 3 massive blocking stones, closing the tomb forever. At Bryn Celli Ddu, they buried a freestanding pillar inside a chamber and sacrificed an ox in a pit. At Isbister and West Kennet alike, they removed human bones, sorted them, and circulated them, rather than leaving the bodies whole. These are not the acts of people simply disposing of the dead. They treated both monuments and bodies as things to be transformed. The dead were excarnated, defleshed by exposure, before selected bones were carried inside. Ancestral bones were kept in circulation, so the dead stayed socially present among the living for generations. And then, at certain moments, everything could be reversed. A working tomb could be sealed. A sacred standing stone could be broken. A useful monument could be deliberately ended. The timing of these closures is telling. The Great Sealing at West Kennet, around 2000 BC, coincides with the arrival of the Beaker culture and a wave of new people and new beliefs across Britain. Breaking and sealing may mark an ideological rupture. The closing of one world as another opens. Sometimes the past was honored and preserved. Sometimes it was deliberately overwritten and shut away. The same culture that built for eternity could turn around and ceremonially kill its own monuments. This is what makes these gestures the hardest of all to explain. Building, we understand. The drive to raise something great and lasting is deeply human. But the deliberate destruction, the burial of a perfectly good standing stone, the permanent sealing of a tomb still in use. These are acts whose emotional logic, the fear or the reverence or the need for severance that drove them, is completely lost to us. The monuments had life cycles, a birth, a long use, and a ceremonial death. The builders' final gestures are at once the most deliberate things they did and the most opaque, and that opacity points to a deeper truth about how little we can ever recover. It is worth being honest about the limits of what excavation can tell us. At Menga, at Hougue Bie, at Bryn Celli Ddu, the acidic soils dissolve the human remains, so we often cannot even say with confidence who was buried or how many. At Maeshowe, looters emptied the chamber long before any archaeologist arrived. At Isbister, the radiocarbon dating of the eagle bones overturned a confident interpretation that had stood for decades. Again and again, the evidence we most want has already been destroyed, stolen, or scrambled by thousands of years of reuse. And there's a deeper problem still. Engineering can be reconstructed, belief cannot be excavated, we can weigh the 150-ton capstone at Menga, but we cannot know what it meant to the people who dragged it. We can map the solstice beam at Newgrange to the minute, but we cannot recover the words spoken when it entered the chamber. The grave goods survive, the stories attached to them do not. New tools keep reopening sites once thought settled, ancient DNA revealing migrations the original excavators never suspected, isotope analysis tracing where people grew up, microscanning and LiDAR finding structures hidden for millennia. Yet the core mysteries endure. The sudden, inexplicable hierarchy at Varna, the eagles at Isbister, the possible lunar map at Knowth, the deep well at Menga, the buried pillar at Bryn Celli Ddu, each new answer to how only sharpens the unanswerable why. And where the evidence runs out, fringe theories rush in to fill the vacuum with lost super civilizations and impossible knowledge, while mainstream archaeology, more honestly, resists the certainty the public craves. Perhaps that discomfort is the wrong response. These mysteries are not gaps to be embarrassed by. They are the honest edge of human knowledge, the point where the record simply ends. The same symbol may have meant different things in different centuries, even at the same tomb. The tombs were built above all to communicate, to carry meaning forward through time. And we have lost the code. Maybe in the end, the point was never for us to understand them at all. 10 tombs, 5,000 years, one continent's western edge. They were built by farming societies with no writing and, in most cases, barely any metal. And yet they are united by scale, by their alignments to the sky, by their carved and unreadable art, and by a deliberate layered mystery that has outlasted every civilization that came after. Every answer they offer breeds another question. They share, above all, a refusal to be simple. The people who built them wanted to be remembered. In that, they succeeded beyond anything they could have imagined. We remember the monuments. We have simply lost the meanings. A strange partial victory over time. And so each generation re-enters these chambers and reads its own questions into the dark. Vikings carve their boasts on the walls of Maeshowe. Christians raise chapels on the mound of Hougue Bie. We point cameras and run isotope tests and argue over maps of the moon. The tombs outlast us all. That is the quiet lesson of these places. They prove beyond any doubt that the people of deep prehistory were not primitive. They were sophisticated, organized, observant, and capable of engineering and astronomy that still impresses us. They were not lesser versions of us, they were us, earlier. The gold of Varna, the eagles of Isbister, the 17 minutes of light at Newgrange, all of it still unexplained, all of it still waiting. The impulse to bury the dead with such care is the oldest signature of our species. The impulse to understand those dead is ours, here, now. To stand inside one of these chambers is to feel 5,000 years collapse into a single moment, the builder and the visitor briefly sharing the same dark, the same stone, the same silence. Their certainties are gone. Only their architecture remains. We keep opening these tombs because they keep refusing to close. The mystery is not a failure of archaeology. It is the measure of how much was lost. What they knew, they took with them. And the stones keep the silence.